Welcome to the Hindu Daily. Today we're undertaking a deep dive looking at this critical tension between access and blockades. Whether it's political power maybe blocking the people's will or corporate power blocking knowledge.
Or even, physical laws blocking our view of the early universe.
Exactly. We're starting, though, by looking at a really striking case of political accountability, this one in Sri Lanka. We're focusing on the arrest back in August 2025 of the former Sri Lankan president, Ranil Wickremesinghe. And it all revolved around alleged misuse of public funds.
Right. Specifically, Sri Lankan rupees 16.2 million, that's about $50,000 US, which was used for stopover in the UK. This was back in September 2023.
Okay, a stopover. But what makes this so, well, politically charged?
Well, the purpose, the detail that really makes this fascinating is why he stopped over. It was apparently for a personal university event honoring his wife. So you have his supporters framing it politically, of course. They're arguing, a head of state is entitled to presidential perks for something like this.
Perks, okay. Even for a personal event.
That's their argument. But the public perception seems radically different.
And this is where the source material really lands a punch, I thought. We aren't talking about a huge sum on the global stage, maybe $50,000.
Relatively speaking, yeah.
But the source points out that LKR is 16.2 million. Well, that's what the median Sri Lankan household would need about 18 years to earn.
18 years. That's really the core insight here, isn't it? The public isn't just looking at the dollar amount anymore. They're measuring political excess in terms of average people's working lives.
It puts it in stark perspective.
Absolutely. When you think about what that could actually buy a home, several educations, maybe multiple fishing boats for a community, the lack of tolerance for what seems like political carelessness becomes, well, instantly understandable.
And this shift in values, it seems directly tied to the demands from the July 2022 mass protests.
It really reflects that. And it's important to remember, even though Wickremesinghe later called those protesters fascists.
A strong label.
Very. But they were the ones clearly demanding respect for public property. You heard things like, if we break anything here, we're the ones paying for it. That kind of sentiment.
So that feeling has now sort of institutionalized itself.
It seems like it. This incident, even if his legal team frames it as just a careless error, it taps into that deep, enduring resentment against political excess. We saw it in the 2015 anti-corruption wave. We saw it with the eviction of Gotabaya Rajapaksa in 2022.
People are demanding transparency, scrutiny.
Down to the last rupee, it seems.
Okay, so if that's the public mood, this arrest creates a huge political risk for the current government, the NPP, the National People's Power.
Oh, absolutely. A massive risk. The NPP is, the reform-focused party. They command over 150 members in parliament right now.
So by charging such an eminent, established figure over this specific sum,
they're setting a new standard, an extremely high one for political accountability. They're basically inviting everyone, the opposition, the public, to hold their own first-time MPs to that exact same level of scrutiny for every single expense.
And haven't they already felt some of that heat themselves?
They have. The NPP is still seen as a bit of a political experiment by many voters, right? And they've already had to start investigating 2 of their own ministers over fraud allegations.
So this move against Wickremesinghe, it puts accountability front and center.
It does. But it also means their own commitment to cleaning up politics is going to be tested constantly. Not just by opponents, but maybe even by their own past actions.
That focus on political excess. The challenge to established elites. It provides a really neat thematic bridge, actually. We move from Sri Lanka's demand for accountability to India.
Right. And here we're exploring the rise of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. His career really challenges that traditional view of, privilege and political dynasties defining leadership.
What's interesting is tracing his leadership style back to his roots. A modest household in Vanagar.
Exactly. The source material emphasizes that even as a young man, he showed a real knack for organizing and a sense of social concern. Things like setting up charity stalls for flood victims.
Collecting used books for classmates. Even writing a play about caste discrimination. These are small things, but telling.
Very telling. And then there's his training in the RSS, that's the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, the big ideological organization. He was a prachar.
A full-time organizer, basically.
Yeah, and that meant traveling all across Gujarat, often just by bus or scooter. He depended on villagers for food, for shelter.
Building trust through shared hardship, not through established power structures.
Precisely. And that kind of groundwork, that preparation, it proved critical in times of crisis. He was only 29 when he mobilized relief efforts after that awful 1979 Machu Dam collapse.
A huge undertaking.
Immense. And later, during a major drought, he led the Sukti Abhiyan, distributing food worth nearly 25 crore.
And we shouldn't forget the sheer nerve during the emergency. He was just 25, disguising himself as a Sikh to keep communication lines open, evading police. That's organizing entirely outside the system.
So when he did transition into electoral politics, those grassroots lessons really defined his approach. He worked on expanding the BJP's reach, nurturing leaders from diverse non-dynastic backgrounds.
Even as chief minister in 2001, his first big move wasn't some symbolic gesture, it was practical. An immediate meeting on getting Narmada water to Sabarmati. A massive logistical challenge.
Yeah, focused on delivery. And that connects to his core political philosophy, the one that resonates nationally, Jan Bhagadari.
Citizen participation.
That's the key link, I think. His approach aimed to transform governance, not just top-down bureaucracy, but a kind of people's movement.
Things like Prevshotsov for school enrollment or Kanya Kelavani for girls' education.
Exactly. Pushing decision-making and, importantly, action out of the capital city into the towns and villages. These Gujarat experiments, which kind of bypassed the usual elite channels, they became national templates later on.
Like the Swachh Bharat mission, you mean?
Swachh Bharat, Jan Dhan Yojana. These really showcase his instinct for connecting power directly to the people, rather than relying on, drawing room debates or established elites.
Okay, so Modi's success, or at least his strategy, hinges on democratizing governance, connecting power to the people. But if we shift from politics to academia, we find these huge structural barriers still exist when it comes to democratizing knowledge itself.
Yeah, the paywalls. Restricting access to scientific research, especially for the global south, it's a major issue.
And the paradox here is, well, it feels almost scandalous, as the source puts it. India has the fourth highest number of PhD graduates globally, a massive pool of talent.
Huge. Yet those same researchers face really crippling resource constraints. PhD stipends are notoriously low, maybe $20,000 to $35,000 a month.
Which is not a lot to live on, let alone pay for research access.
Exactly, because accessing a single essential paper, just one, can cost anywhere from $20 up to $3,000.
$3,000, that's over 2.64 lakh for one paper.
It's financially impossible for most researchers, especially students, to comply with that system.
Which is why the recent Delhi High Court order, the one blocking free access sites like Sci-Hub and LibGen, why that's so deeply controversial.
Right. And that order came after a plea from just 3 major academic publishers, 3 companies that essentially corner about 40% of the entire market.
So this raises a really critical question, ethically and financially. Who's actually committing the theft here?
That's the provocative question the source poses, yeah. Academic publishers make enormous profits from the essentially free labor of the research community work, often funded by taxpayers or student fees.
And then they turn around and block access to that very knowledge.
For their own profit, yes. It seems fundamentally broken to many.
And the need for free access, particularly in the global south, it's acute, isn't it?
It really is. There was a 2021 study mentioned highlighting India's reliance on these free portals. India accounted for something like 8.7% of Sci-Hub's total downloads back in 2017.
And a significant chunk of that was health-related.
Crucially, yes, 19% of those downloads were specifically for medical and health sciences papers.
That health context seems vital for equity.
It absolutely is. Think about organizations like Doctors Without Borders, MSF. They're constantly dealing with evolving disease patterns like drug-resistant TB or HIV. Treatment plans need to be customized, constantly updated based on the latest geographical medical data.
And accessing that data quickly is critical.
Life-saving, often. And consider this. 2/3 of all global TB cases are reported from just 8 countries, all in the global south. Blocking access to the latest research fundamentally hinders effective, localized healthcare in the places that need it most.
So the systemic issue is clear. It's the corporatization of knowledge. Profit becomes the main motive.
Which leads to this idea of owning human knowledge through patents and intellectual property. It creates this absurd situation where research conducted in the global south may be involving local populations.
It becomes inaccessible to the very people who participated or who would benefit most directly.
Exactly. It's a huge disconnect.
So what's the way forward?
Well, the argument is that knowledge should be treated as an infinite resource, a commons, not something to be locked up. The call to action is really to leverage existing frameworks, like the 2021 UNESCO framework on open science.
The one adopted by 193 member countries, including India.
That's the one. The idea is to use that existing political agreement, that leverage, to actually pressure publishers to open up channels for scientific information access. Make open science a reality, not just a framework.
Okay, we're transitioning now from the, let's say, the smallest, most essential units of knowledge, maybe a single research paper.
To the largest, most violent explosions in the known universe.
Quite a leap. For a long time, astronomers thought gamma-ray bursts, GRBs, were the most powerful events since the Big Bang itself. But here's where it gets really interesting.
Indeed. Astronomers, specifically from the University of Hawaii's Institute for Astronomy, have identified a whole new, much more powerful category. Extreme nuclear transients.
ENTs.
Extreme nuclear transients, and these are bigger than GRBs. Much bigger. They've been confirmed now as the most energetic class of transient events ever discovered. They completely dwarf all the previous record holders.
Wow. And the mechanics behind them. I love the imagery the source used here, this idea of a star getting too close to a black hole, like Icarus flying too close to the sun.
It's a good analogy. ENTs happen when extremely massive stars, we're talking at least 3 times heavier than our own sun, wander too close to the supermassive black holes sitting in the centers of galaxies.
Okay, so the star gets pulled in.
Not just pulled in. The black hole's immense tidal forces the stretching force of gravity. They stretch and compress the star into what the sources vividly describe as a long, thin, spaghetti-like shape.
Spaghettification, I've heard of that.
That's the one. And this violent process, as the stellar material gets accreted near the event horizon, releases just colossal amounts of electromagnetic energy. That bright flash, that emission, that's the ENT.
Okay, what's the scale of this violence? If GRBs were the old record, how much more energy are we talking with ENTs?
Up to 10 times more energy than the previous record holders. So a huge leap in power.
10 times.
And what also makes them unique and useful for astronomers is their longevity. They remain intensely bright, particularly in radio wavelengths, for years after the initial event.
Years. So they're easier to track over time.
Much easier to track and study across these enormous cosmic distances, yeah.
And the discovery process itself, it sounds like classic modern astronomy sifting through massive data sets.
Absolutely. The lead author, Jason Hinkle, apparently found the first couple of potential sources back in 2016 and 2018 by carefully combing through data from the Gaia spacecraft, then followed up with UV and X-ray missions.
But 2 sources aren't enough to claim a whole new class of object, right?
Right. Confidence really solidified later, specifically when another facility, the Zwicky Transient Facility, published details of a third, highly similar event in 2023. That provided enough consistency, enough examples to officially categorize ENTs as a distinct phenomenon.
Okay, we should probably quickly distinguish ENTs from similar-sounding things. Like tidal disruption events, TDEs, aren't they also stars getting ripped apart by black holes?
They are, yes. You can think of ENTs as essentially the TDEs of very massive stars, but there are key differences.
Such as?
While ENTs seem to be much rarer, they also tend to occur in much larger host galaxies, and crucially, they involve significantly more massive central black holes than typical TDEs.
Okay, so bigger stars, bigger black holes, bigger galaxies lead to these extreme events.
That seems to be the picture. And they're also distinct from something called fast X-ray transients, or FXTs.
Right, FXTs. What are those?
FXTs are generally lower energy X-ray signals. They seem to happen when the high energy particle jets from something like a supernova get contained within the exploding star's envelope rather than escaping freely. It's a different mechanism.
Got it. So the extreme brightness of ENTs. What does that allow astronomers to do that they couldn't before? What's the big advantage?
The luminosity is the key. It's so incredibly bright, even across cosmic time. It will allow astronomers to study massive black holes way back in the early universe.
Even ones that aren't actively feeding.
Exactly. Especially the ones that aren't actively accreting mass, which is actually the vast majority of supermassive black holes out there. They're usually invisible. ENTs light them up briefly.
So we can find these hidden giants from the early cosmos.
That's the hope. And upcoming instruments, particularly AI-powered ones like the Vera C. Rubin Observatory and the Nancy Grace Roman Space Telescope that's slated for 2027, they'll be specifically looking for and analyzing these events to understand those early cosmic giants.
Okay, from events spanning billions of years, let's bring that vast time scale right down to the constitutional clock. We pivot back to India now, looking at that political conflict over speed.
Right. Specifically, the demand that governors act as soon as possible on state bills and what that actually means in practice.
This feels like a persistent constitutional friction point.
It really is. The Supreme Court is currently examining a presidential reference. This was made back in May 2025, asking, I think, 14 specific questions about how to interpret Articles 200 and 201.
These are the articles dealing with the governor's role in approving or not approving state bills?
Precisely. Assenting to bills. The root of this whole examination is the Supreme Court's own judgment from April 2025.
What did that judgment say?
It tried to inject some structure, some timelines. It basically stipulated a 3-month deadline for governors to decide on a bill if they're withholding assent or reserving it for the president, especially if that goes against the advice of the state's Council of Ministers.
3 months. And importantly, if a bill is sent back and the legislature passes it again.
Then the judgment said the governor shall assent, mandatory.
Okay, so where's the conflict? That seems clear enough.
Well, the conflict is between that judgment and the literal text of the Constitution. Article 200 gives the governor 4 options: assent, withhold, return, or reserve for the president.
But it doesn't give a deadline.
Exactly. It provides no specific time limit. It just says the governor may return the bill as soon as possible. Vague wording.
So the center's argument is that the court overstepped by imposing a deadline that isn't actually written in the Constitution.
That's their core argument, yes. They argue the court can't just invent timelines.
But surely there's precedent on whether the governor can just indefinitely delay. What about acting on advice?
There is. Established Supreme Court precedent, like the Wickremesinghe case from 1974, confirms the governor generally doesn't exercise personal discretion when withholding assent. They're supposed to act on the advice of the state ministers.
Discretion is only for rare cases, like if a bill is obviously unconstitutional.
Generally, yes. Or for reserving bills for the president in specific circumstances. The discretion isn't meant to be a political tool for delay.
So how does the center justify the delays then?
They lean on Article 163, arguing the governor does have broad discretion, and crucially, that the courts cannot inquire into how that discretion is exercised. They prefer political negotiation to solve these delays, not judicial rulings.
But haven't commissions looked into this before? Didn't the Sarkaria and Punchy commissions recommend time limits? Like 6 months?
They did, yes. Both recommended a 6-month time frame for the governor to act.
So is the Supreme Court's 3-month timeline really an overreach? Or is it more like a necessary judicial intervention because the political system has repeatedly failed to regulate itself against these deliberate delays?
It certainly looks more like the latter. Opposition-ruled states consistently argue these delays aren't genuine acts of constitutional deliberation, they're selective blockades. Political tactics designed to frustrate the popular mandate of the elected state government.
And the underlying issue is the politicization of the governor's post itself.
That seems to be the widely acknowledged disease, as you might call it. This long-standing conflict essentially forced the Supreme Court's hand to try and impose some order.
Okay, so how did the SC justify setting a time limit when the text is vague? What was their reasoning?
They used something called purposive interpretation, looking beyond the literal words to the underlying purpose and principles of the Constitution.
And the purpose here is?
Democratic governance and federalism. They highlighted that the word shall in Article 200 relating to the governor's duty to act on a repassed bill isn't really discretionary. So by setting the 3-month timeline in that April judgment, they were essentially enforcing those core federal and democratic principles against unreasonable, politically motivated delays.
So the presidential reference now is basically asking the court to reaffirm or clarify that stance.
That seems to be the crux of it, yes. Urging the center and governors to uphold the spirit, not just the vague letter, of the Constitution on this.
Okay, finally, let's explore the world of supercomputing. These technological giants built to solve problems so huge they'd take regular computers literally years, maybe centuries, to crack.
Right. And the core concept isn't about building one super fast brain. It's parallel computing.
Meaning lots of processors working together.
Thousands, even millions of processors working simultaneously. You have these things called nodes, which are basically bundles of processors and memory, maybe thousands of them. They're all connected by incredibly high-speed networking, and they all tackle small parts of a massive problem at the exact same time.
It sounds incredibly complex just to manage.
It is. And the physical scale is just extraordinary. These machines generate so much heat, they need massive bespoke cooling systems. We're talking dedicated water pipes running through them, heavy-duty refrigeration, sometimes even immersing the components directly in special liquids.
Wow. It sounds less like a computer and more like, I don't know, a nuclear reactor's control system or something. Requires its own infrastructure.
Pretty much. And the power consumption is immense, easily equal to that of a small town.
A whole town's worth of electricity, just for one machine.
For the biggest ones, yes. But the payoff is that staggering performance. We measure it in flops, floating point operations per second.
And today's top machines are at
Exaflops, that's a quintillion, a billion operations per second.
a quintillion per second. It's hard to even wrap your head around that number.
To put it in perspective, a single exaflop machine can perform more calculations in 1 second than every single human on Earth could manage, using a calculator over their entire lifetime.
That's incredible. And how does someone actually use one of these beasts? You don't just sit down with a keyboard, presumably.
No, not at all. You access them remotely. Users submit job scripts, basically instructions for the calculation they want to run to a scheduler.
A scheduler, like a waiting list program.
Exactly. It's a sophisticated program that manages the queue of tasks from potentially dozens or hundreds of users, figures out which nodes are free, and assigns the jobs efficiently. It functions much more like a shared, vital scientific instrument, think a giant telescope or a particle accelerator, than a personal computer.
Right. And India has a history here, doesn't it? This wasn't something we just started recently.
No, India's efforts go back to the late 1980s. It was spurred, actually, by Western nations refusing to export high-end supercomputers to India at the time.
So necessity became the mother of invention.
Pretty much. This led CDAC, the Center for Development of Advanced Computing, to develop India's own indigenous Param series. The first one, Param 8000, came out in 1991.
And that effort continued.
Yes, it was formalized and scaled up with the National Supercomputing Mission, or NSM, launched in 2015. The goal is ambitious: to build a national network of over 70 high-performance computing facilities across the country.
And where does India stand now globally?
Well, India's current fastest publicly ranked machine is Arawatt PSAI, located at CDAC in Pune. It's ranked well within the global top 100 supercomputers.
And these machines are doing critical work, right? Not just academic exercises.
Absolutely critical. They're used for things like monsoon and climate modeling. The Pratyush and Mihir systems are dedicated to that. Also for drug discovery, complex simulations like modeling black holes, and increasingly for training the massive AI models that are becoming so important.
So what's next? What does the future look like in supercomputing?
We're seeing the continued arrival of true exascale computing across the world, like the Jupiter system in Germany, which is notable for being powered by renewables. Beyond that, there's the long-term promise of quantum computers, although that's still quite developmental, and also research into more energy-efficient designs like neuromorphic computing, which is inspired by the structure of the human brain.
Fascinating stuff. But the foundation, it seems, remains that ability to coordinate millions of processors to tackle these immense problems.
That's the core of it, yes, managing that massive parallelism.
You know, looking back across all these articles, whether we're talking about a governor maybe withholding Ascent on a bill, or a publisher hiding research behind a paywall, or even a politician allegedly misusing public funds, the fundamental tension seems remarkably consistent today, doesn't it? It's this resistance of centralized power, whether that's political power or corporate power, against forces pushing for, well, efficiency, transparency, and access.
That's a really interesting thread connecting them all, access versus control.
Yeah. It makes you wonder, are these blockades we see, are they deliberate speed bumps consciously designed to maintain control? Or are they just, the unavoidable friction you get in any complex system? Something to think about.
Powerful thought to end on, indeed.
Thank you for listening. If you want to provide suggestions, please contact on the Twitter handle given in the episode description. As always, we are eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.